Hello, Culture Matters Podcast. I am excited to introduce you to our guest today. Before I do that, here's a quote just for this episode. If the culture doesn't fit, don't settle. There's an opportunity waiting for you to create something that aligns with your values and leadership style. The key is finding the right guidance to make it happen. Andrea Dobkin. Our author today, our guest today, is an author, the business ownership journey, an advisor, a guide, the person behind the quote that I chose today, who I got to meet through someone that we care about, we love very deeply, who's a great friend of the Culture Matters podcast, the one and only Mike Calhoun, brought Andrea into my life. And she's been helping business owners and those that want to pursue entrepreneurship from a consultative and advisory perspective for well over a decade, with a business background in business management. But she's a chief franchise guide of her organization, helping potentially you that's listening learn more about that space and get involved in that space or improve or transform that space if you're already in the franchising world. So thanks for coming on the show. I have a million culture questions and a million questions around franchising today. So thanks. I'm excited. I'm actually really excited about this.
Thank you, Jay. I am too. I'm so grateful to Mike for the introduction. And, Board of Advisors is doing some phenomenal work, and I'm thrilled about our connection through Mike. So thank you for inviting me. I'm excited about today.
Now, the this idea of a guide
Mm.
versus like you could have chosen a lot of there's a lot of a lot of words that you could have chosen for that role as it relates to someone in that world or pursuing that world. Why the word guide? What meaning or significance does that have to you?
That's an interesting question. And I think about a couple of things. The dedication in my book, which really drove a lot of the reasons I'm in this business and the word that I chose. My dad, who passed away in his early 60s,
Ah,
but he was, a man who didn't go to college and was trying to find his way through business, went to into the Navy and had a career as a manager in um, a government agency, and he bought a franchise. And he was so excited about having his own business. But one of the things that I realized is I was probably about 10 or 11, and he came home from work one day and he was crying. And I'd never seen my father cry.
ah,
And I heard he and my mother in the other room, and he talked about the business and how it had failed because the employees he had, because he was working full time, he was trusting the employees, they weren't doing the work. And I remember thinking, how could this happen? And Jay, I forgot about it for 50 years. And about a year ago, it came back to me. And I thought about how he needed a guide to help him be successful on his journey because he didn't have the support. And being in business is tough. You know that, I know that. It's not an easy journey. And if you don't have someone to help guide you on that path, it can be really difficult. And I realized at that point, guide was a perfect word. It's kind of like, a Sherpa, if you will. And I didn't want to use that term, but I think when we're going into uncharted waters, we need someone who can help us with questions and guide us through that journey that we're on.
what it was a lawn care
Yes.
business?
Yeah.
Do you remember what it was about that specific type that interested him?
You know, I think that people look at franchise businesses specifically as I can be an absentee owner and it's going to be great. It's going to be easy. Lawn, I'll hire someone who can cut lawns. I don't need to be the one cutting the grass. And I think there's a misnomer there. There
Ah,
really are very few absentee ownership models. He was working full time and
wow.
he didn't have the ability. There were no cell phones then, right? He had no ability to stay in touch with his employees. And what he found was that they weren't cutting the grass. So he was sending invoices, no one was paying him. So he was
Oh,
heartbroken because he was trusting these people. It literally changed the way his life, how he felt about himself and his life. And that's the struggle is there are semi-absentee owners, there are owner operator roles. You have to be involved in your day-to-day business. And that impacted me so much. I didn't even know
Wow.
until so long ago. So he literally changed my life. And I believe as you're exploring business ownership opportunities, and my book talks about that because there's several different ways to go. You can buy a franchise, which is, really being in business. This is so cliche, but it's so true. Being in business for yourself, not by yourself.
Hmm.
There's solopreneurs, starting something as an entrepreneur, you get to create everything, you build your own business, you've got full control. And then there's buying an existing business, or a resale, which can be a great benefit. You're paying a lot more, but you have income out of the gate, but you have to know that there's some pitfalls in there. So when you're
Mhm.
looking at all three options, which is the best for you? And having someone walk you through how to ask questions, what's the best way to explore these opportunities is really key.
Have you seen that the work, I guess the working culture today is more interested in the franchise than in the past, or is it like is it neutral? Is it what in the conversations that you had
Mm.
throughout the country, throughout your career, is it from when you started to today? You think it's a higher interest? And the reason I'm asking that specific, I have a lot of people on the show that say they can't find employees,
Mm.
which is another way of saying that we're not engaging our people. So like my thought would be, if that's happening, are there more people pursuing that? Is that you know, do you see that reflected in the growth of that space, the
What's
interest?
interesting, there's some numbers that would show that it's pretty flat. People continue to look at businesses and really never take the step because they don't know what to do.
Ah,
So, for example, people call me and say, well, I always thought I had to buy a McDonald's or a Subway to be in franchising.
huh,
Right? That they think that's really what franchising is, and they don't realize at any time in a yearly basis, there are 3,500 franchise brands in the United States,
holy,
over 300 different categories. So everything you can imagine, investments less than 100,000 and investments more than 1 million. So people don't really understand what it is. So I believe that I listened to a podcast last night with Jay Shetty and Mel Robbins. They said people would rather live in the familiar than the unfamiliar. So they will show up every day in a culture they're unhappy in, and they might inquire about something online about a business because it's 3 o'clock in the morning and they don't want to wake up the next day and they're like panicked. That's what happens. And then they
yes,
never want to take a phone call because they're like, oh, I did that out of I was in a manic moment, right? And then they never answer the phone call because they don't know how to do it. So it's interesting. Our culture is safety, stay in the same job. You've got something, just stick with it until
mm,
one day you wake up and say, I just can't do it another day. And it doesn't mean that entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship, which we'll talk about later, is the right step for you. Sometimes being a W-2 employee works.
mm.
So, and part of the fear of someone who buys a business or starts a business is how will I find employees? And you can talk to this much better than I can. Create your culture so people want to work for you, right? You get to control that.
Are there elements that you've seen in the franchises that you've worked with that like Abraham Lincoln said, I learn from everyone I meet. Usually it's what not to do.
Mm.
So if let's say we took a franchise tomorrow with a listener and we have a trifecta partnership, Munger, invert, always invert. If we were going to really undermine that thing as quickly as possible,
Mhm.
what would be some of the anti-values to taking on franchising?
Well, I want to talk about one thing specifically first. I was just last week at a franchise brand. I spent a lot of time going to franchisors and meeting. I represent over 800 brands. So I go
Wow.
and visit them, and I was with a brand that specializes in home care, in-home senior care, keeping seniors in home, and it's non-medical. They have a theory. It's called the family of franchise owners. They focus on their franchisees as part of their family, and they treat them that way. Franchising is about support. It's about following a process and step by step with successful owners teaching you how to do what they've done successfully. So you're not starting from scratch and trying to build it. It takes so much longer. That's the beauty of franchising.
Mm.
Sitting in the room with the executive team and watching and listening to what they've done to build this model. They've got over 100 franchisees, all very, very successful. And hiring caregivers is not an easy thing to do today. Um, However, when you look at what's happening in the United States, 10,000 people turn 65 every single day.
Holy cow.
There's a lot of baby boomers. I'm the youngest of the baby boomers, so I understand that. And these people need care. So when you find a brand that speaks to who you are, because it's interesting. There's a quote in my book that talks about when you're looking for a business, sometimes you have to disregard the financials and take that into consideration, but it's your gut, it's your intuition that speaks to you, that tells you this is the right place to be. And the financials have to make sense. And how you'll research that is there's a franchise disclosure document that gives financials. You get to call all the franchisees and talk to them about their experience in the franchise. How do you feel about them? Do you feel there's a collaborative, there's something you have a connection with those people? That's the key. You get to meet with the franchisors. You really do a lot of research in the process. It's not you call and make a decision overnight. So that's part of this, is
Mm.
doing your research.
One thing I get from that is don't put yourself in the room or don't participate if you're not going to get the most out of it. There's a
Yes.
there's a communal aspect to being a successful franchisee. Is that the case?
100%. Yes, you'll have a mentor in the network. There's yearly events. There's tremendous training and support. It's again, you're not by yourself. You've got this safety net of a group, and all of the franchisors that we work with and we select them personally is, they've got a support team, sometimes regionally, so someone who can come to you regularly. But you can call and say, hey, I know I learned this in training. I don't know what to do moving forward, or I've got this struggle with a client or an employee. What do I do? It's really a support network. And I think all of us have this little part of our brain that dreams of being an entrepreneur, and we don't know what step to take.
Mm. What, how much of it being successful in the franchise model for our listeners is their values fitting with the brand's values? So if I'm thinking of 800 brands, there's different values, or how much of it is that, and what relationship do you have as a guide in helping that integration?
That's a great question. When people look at franchises, typically they'll come in on a brand that they found at, maybe 11 o'clock at night or 3 in the morning. And the chances of them actually moving forward with that category are very slim. It's something that intrigued
Really?
them. They thought about it. Perfect example is there's a great closet design brand. A lot of people come through that and they don't realize maybe that they're not going to be the one doing the work, and they really want to be involved in the business. So as I take them through a very thorough process of learning who they are and what drives them, that's the key. And it starts with their investment. I have financial partners, funding experts who take them through the funding process, because that's important first. Unless they have the capital, they need to know how much they can apply for and get approved for. So we'll go down that path, and then I really get to learn who they are. And it's amazing,
Mm.
that process, what people will say on a phone call that they don't even realize, they're not even consciously thinking of it. It's their subconscious saying, and pets are my favorite. They'll say it 3 or 4 times on the phone, but they never think about a pet business. So
Wow.
it's really about having someone who you are a great podcast interviewer, right? I have to interview them as well and ask them pointed questions to tease out where they find their geniuses. It's really a genius and they don't see it. And some people come in with the exact genius. I'm working with someone who
Wow.
called, she was referred by a candidate I'm working with, and she said, I really want to farm. And I said, I don't really have any farming brands. And literally the next day, we partnered with a farming as a service brand. And she's like, how did that happen? I said, I don't know. I think the
Wow.
universe was involved, but literally there are brands for everything and for every type of person. And sometimes franchising doesn't work because some of my candidates are too entrepreneurial. They'll never follow a system and they won't be successful.
Following, well, what relationship in following a system, what relationship does following a system have with the success of the franchise?
It's significant. If you want to build a business from scratch, build it from scratch. If you really want a business that, here's how you start.
Mm.
Here's how much you should spend on marketing. Here's vendors that work for our brand. Here's how we treat our clients. Here's our operations manual. Here's how you build relationships in your community. Because at the end of the day, this is a community business. You're a local owner in a community, and you've got to participate in that community. Join the chamber, show up at networking meetings, build relationships with collaborative businesses that you can get referrals from. They're going to teach you all of those pieces. And that's not instinctual for some people. It's actually, there's a lot of fear in that.
What, what do you mean?
Well, it's interesting. I've been a franchisor 3 times in my life in emerging brands, so
Wow.
all brand new. Um, And I would say to people, okay, their first day open. We did this in training. I call them, what are you doing? Sitting in my office. I'm like, do you have any clients? No. I'm like, okay. So we're going to lock the door. You're going to leave and you're going to go out and you're going to talk to 10 people today. Oh, I can't do that. We agreed that we were going to do that. We talked about it in training. You've been trained on it. Okay. It's this uncomfortable feeling
Wow.
of, what do I say? How do I do it? And that relationship, we're in a day and age of technology. People believe, well, if I run Google Ads and I advertise on Facebook and I make a post a week, people will come. And that does work sometimes. And you bring in some customers that way. But you and I both know relationships are the key to building a strong business.
Mm.
And having those local community connections that will refer you really are what build great success. I always say to people, you're going to be the mayor of the town. You're going to walk around and shake hands and communicate with people, talk to people when you're in line at the grocery store. Hey, I just opened a business. If you're uncomfortable with that, then this may not be a good time for you to start a business. Maybe
Is,
working for a company is key.
is part of the value of the franchise's brand that actually helps conversion rate
Mhm.
if the
It
person
does.
is willing to have the courage to step into. It's like having, there's a fire, but do I have enough water? Do I have the
Mm.
equipment? Do I know how to
Exactly.
aim the hose? So that's the synthesis. And you're helping our listeners figure out if they are ready to hold the hose, even hold it.
To even hold
Or,
it. Right.
okay, so if you can, like, I want to make sure I'm tracking. Uh, Part of the value of having a brand that's aligned with me as a franchisee is when I'm out working, there's going to be a return on that time and intention.
And you're looking at other franchisees who've taken that path, hundreds of them, and have been successful. So it's, doing the research up front, and the brand name makes a difference. There are times where I work with someone and they're looking at a home service brand, for example. Home service brands are very, very hot.
Wow.
People are, staying in their homes longer, or their homes are 30 to 40 years old and they have to upgrade. And someone said to me, well, why can't I just do this myself? I said, you can. However, the brand name and the systems and the processes, you don't have to go find your own POS system. Most of these brands have AI software to help you with design of the home if you're doing flooring or closets. And they have a network. Some of them have national accounts they've already built in. So you know you're going to get a job from Walmart for painting or for Lifetime Fitness because they have those brands already, those relationships.
Mm.
So they're doing everything they can. You have to do the work at the end of the day as the owner of the franchise. You have to be the one to hire the right people and build the culture and take those steps. And it is
What
uncomfortable. There's some days where you're like, oh, I have to stand up at a BNI meeting and talk about my business. Yeah, that's going to be what you do. It is. It's part of it.
what percentage of people that do you uh even if it's gut, right? Do you think they're looking for that to kind of as to solve their problems versus them? Like
Mm.
I mean like the disengage you mentioned being engaged, right? That's a big piece. So it's this thing's just going to work for me. Is that a big misnomer? I guess that's the question. Like, what percentage of those that seek out franchising, that is the mind thought, is that this is going to be like a, like those real estate gurus that say, like, hey, this property is going to be passive. Well, who's fixing the toilet? Oh, but they didn't say that in the infomercial or whatever. So, like, what percentage of our listeners might be thinking, because they don't know what they don't know, they haven't talked to a guide like yourself, that it could be, it's like, the benefit without responsibility or something like that.
It's kind of like my dad. He thought I could just buy a business and it would work. And he didn't know how to engage. So what happens to some people is they believe, okay, I'll buy a franchise, they're going to do everything, and I'm just going to sit and passively run it, just like the real estate, right? And that's the beauty of the process and having a guide along the way. So when you're looking at a franchise, it's a several week or month process, depending on who the candidate is and the franchisor. They'll take them through, several interviews by phone. Usually they'll have them fly out to the corporate location and meet the executive team on the franchisee's dime. They have to pay for themselves to go there. It's a big commitment.
Wow.
And then there's a validation. You're calling franchisees and really asking thorough questions and having someone who can help you with those questions. What was it like during training? What kind of support do you have? Who is your support person? What was it like your first month? What was your revenue your first quarter? You get to learn all that. As an entrepreneur starting from scratch, you have no one to reference. You're just building something and hoping, it works. That doesn't mean they're not successful. There's some data out there that at year 5, 85% of franchisees are still running their businesses. Solopreneurs, 30% are still running their businesses at year 5.
So it's flipped. A greater percentage are still in business versus totally on one's own, a higher or out.
Yes.
I have a question about, I want to go back to um, how much, so, okay, let's say I have my concept. I'm a potential franchisee and I'm going into it thinking this could be a passive, but what relationship does it have with, what responsibility does the company have with helping me? Because it helping me overcome that misnomer, meaning, do I think that before or was I sold that? I'm curious about the ethics
Mm.
part of the conversation. And whether we want to use, like, I'm thinking about if you said your father, he served in the Navy, right? I read that.
Mhm.
Came back from, was that Vietnam? Was
No,
that
he wasn't in
Vietnam?
Vietnam, but
But in the wartime in that
mhm.
era,
Mhm.
that's a really tough time. But like, what relationship does the salesperson have in leading somebody to buy into a franchise under the notion that it's going to be less responsibility with a greater return versus just as much, if not more responsibility with a way bigger return? You see where I'm going with that? I'm trying to,
Yes.
what's the responsibility of the actual brands in how they communicate the value potentially to the franchisee? Because yeah, maybe I don't think it's going to be, I mean, maybe I think it's going to be a lot of work, but then I have a salesperson convince me it's going to be no work. And then I end up uh, undermining my business.
So the brands, that's a great question, Jay. The brands that I work with are very transparent about how much work there is. It's interesting. There's a symbiotic relationship between a franchisee and a franchisor. The franchisor's revenue comes from their franchisees. They get royalties. If the franchisees are unsuccessful, they have failure on their books because they have to list that in their franchise disclosure document every year. How many
Wow.
closed? So there's a lot of checks and balances with franchisors. So they're very upfront about there is no absentee ownership model. Are you leaving your job? There are some that you can stay partially employed for a period of time until your business is up and running, not as many as we all think. So they're very transparent. Here's what the commitment looks like. Talk to our franchisees. Here's what we expect. And it's in the franchise disclosure document. That document is over 200 pages usually, and it's very clearly drawn out. Here's what we expect from you.
What if it's is there a ballpark? Because our listeners, they might be interviewing for this right now. Is there any red flags that you could say that, hey, if you're reading one of these documents and it's 3 pages long, or you see what I'm getting? What are some of the red flags? Because if I remember correctly, there's 3,500, you 800's a lot, but maybe you're only working with the 800 best ones that are ethical, that are moral, and then there's 2,700 not great. Like, are there, you know what I'm saying?
But it
Like,
makes
that's part of
sense.
the
Yeah.
value of being a guide, right? You're
Mhm.
you're separating the wheat from the chaff. But like, what are red flags that listeners, they could be right now, they're about to sign over their life and they didn't do the due diligence.
So I would not sign today. Do not sign. Go do your due diligence and talk to someone who knows what they're doing. There's so many books on the market about franchising. My book is really specific to how to choose, but find a guide. There are thousands of consultants in the United States. There's business brokers that can help you buy a business, and they're going to guide you and give you the questions to ask. The franchise disclosure document that I mentioned a few times is regulated by the Federal Trade Commission. And their purpose is to make sure that every franchise disclosure document for every company that's a franchise follows the same system. There are 23 items. Everyone has the same 23. It would never be 3 pages. The franchisor customizes it for their business.
Mm.
However, it's approved. There are registration states that have a very specific approval process. There are 14 of those in the country. So there's a lot of regulations around it. And the FTC is there to protect the consumer, the franchisee, from being told this is going to be easy. You're going to make $5 million in year one and all of those things, because none of those are true. None of
Mm.
it is easy. It's still hard work. Yet you have a support network. You have a step-by-step process if you choose to follow it. So, if someone's looking at a franchise right now and they don't, it's intuitive. There's no way to explain it other than that. Your gut tells you something doesn't feel right. Do not move forward or ask more questions. It's like dating. It's the same experience, really. And this is a
Mm.
major decision in your life. And what I am finding, you asked earlier about data, we're finding more and more young people in their 20s wanting to buy a franchise. That I haven't seen that in my history. Most
Really?
franchises that I've sold have been 40-year-olds, 50, 60-year-olds. This is the
Wow.
first time that I'm seeing 25-year-olds. Sometimes their parents are supporting them and helping them buy it, or they're getting a loan on their own. And they're building these pretty significant businesses themselves.
What do you think about these private equity conglomerates buying these? Because I saw recently, because I'm from Jersey, don't hold that against me. Jersey Mike sold to one of these massive institutions, and yeah, the first Jersey Mike's is in Point Pleasant, and I've eaten there a handful of times. So they
I've
sold
been
for
there.
$8 billion. You've been there.
I've been to Point Pleasant, yeah.
So what's this mean for the few for the industry in your views? Is that a more bull? Are you more bullish on it? Is that good for us if we're going to buy a bunch of these things and maybe we have a buyer in the next few years? How does that affect the culture like that? I have so many questions around that.
Such a good question. I've heard positives and negatives about that, right? I was just at a brand before the senior care brand that P came in and purchased a bunch of brands. They're getting a tremendous amount of financial support that they wouldn't have been able to hire more staff and do things other than if they didn't have that equity come in. What's interesting that's also happening on the other side of PE is they're buying independent businesses as well. So I've read recently that they're going in communities and buying all the independent plumbers, and they're building conglomerates of plumbers without it
Oh
being
my
a
God.
franchise. So, you know, it's the way that our society is moving, and I can't speak to it yet because I don't know enough about it. I hope it works well. PE looks at businesses very different than families that started a company. Right now I'm working with a couple in Denver who started a brand, and they want to franchise it. So I also can guide people that have a brand and they want to franchise it. I have advisors that take them through that whole process, how to do the FDD, how to build an operations manual. And this is a couple who've been running this business for 30 years. They are going to be more passionate about any franchisee that joins that network than anybody who's owned by PE. That's my intuition. I don't know that that's true. I don't
Well,
work for a company.
you gave me a thought. That gave me a thought that I think that those franchises, who's their guide for that? If there's 10 different PE partners, what are their values? Why are they doing it? Who are they? Is it a wolf in sheep's clothing? Is it because how they look at that organization? You mentioned community support.
Mhm.
Like that's the value proposition to these responsible, engaged citizens that want to take the next level. Who's their guide for that? The franchise.
Franchisors. Your shirt keeps like yelling at me. Your culture really matters. So at the end of the day,
I
right,
agree.
it's 100% how does the culture fit? So PE comes in and pries the company and, bless the owners of the business. They made millions of dollars and they went on with their lives. Maybe they're still involved. And they had an exit strategy and that's what they chose to do. But these, folks in Denver, they want to build a brand. They want to be involved forever. They want to, be involved with their franchisees and show people how to be successful because that's what
Wow.
they did themselves. So you get to choose again, when you're looking at a brand, who owns the company? How involved are they day to day? And most of I would say all of the brands that we're involved in, none of them are owned by PE. They're all mom and pops who started a business 30, 40 years ago and they built a brand, or their parents did, or their grandparents did, and they're still involved.
Are
That's
there
the
core
biggie.
values that scream out to you that clearly
Yes.
work in franchising?
Yes, 100%. And there are candidates who, I believe the brand is a good fit or the category is a good fit, and they don't match. There's a matchmaking process here. They don't match that culture or those core values or their mission. Mission and vision are really key to that research, finding out what that is and does that match who you are as a person.
And is that part of your value proposition then to your clients is to help them figure out are they integrated within this ecosystem as
Yes.
their identity matching up with this actual brand's identity? Because the culture is the identity, the brand is the perception of the identity.
Mm, 100%. And digging deep enough to know what it is, and pushing hard. Years and years ago, I worked with a brand that was an emerging brand. It was new to the industry, and people wouldn't read the franchise disclosure document, and they'd sign the
Wow.
agreement. And I'd say, I can't do this until you read this. Can I allow you to move forward? Because this is our contract. This is how we work together. And calling all the franchisees, I really pushed them to do it. How many did you talk to? What was the call like? Because I'd love to say in life, it's easy. You just pick a business and it's great, you move on. It's not, it's your life investment. And when I look at the categories of people, we talked about young people earlier. I work with executives who've taken a package or can't show up for work another day, or if they've just been through massive layoffs and they're concerned for their own future,
Wow.
retirees who are looking for, an encore, couples who want to be in business together, a stay-at-home parent who's decided that they want to, their kids are now in school or in college and they have never worked, and they all have a specific skill set that goes along with that. Veterans who come out of the military, I have a strong passion for that. They're, they need to land in a place that there's process. That's how they've been trained.
Mm,
So they're entrepreneurs versus entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are those who can work in an entrepreneurial environment, but they need guardrails and process in place to be successful. Entrepreneurs will make stuff up. They're visionaries. They come up with a brand. They just throw stuff at the wall and see how it works. So when you look at all those different categories of people, they all need support in how to find a place to land.
mm.
It's really what it is.
Wow. What about the success piece? Like of the 85% that make it 5 years, what type of life-changing stories have you seen? Without maybe sharing somebody's personal stuff, but like have you, what's the upside? Why is it worth all of the risk, all of the endeavor in the first place? Someone's listening to this right now and they are executive at a company they hate.
Mhm.
What's in it for them if they do work with you, partner with the right brand, and don't quit? Why is it worth it?
You know, we have a culture of, you work for as a W-2 employee, you get paid, they're going to take care of you. There's social security, there's retirement, there's all those things. It doesn't work that way anymore. There is little security now, less than ever before. You mentioned an executive. I want to just take the opposite side of that. About 9 years ago, I worked for a brand and I was in franchise development. So I was the person on the other end screening candidates. I worked for the franchise company. And this woman called me. She had used the service of the brand for her children. And she called me and I screened her and she had no capital. And I said, this isn't a great time. You're going to need X to join the network. And she called me every week for 6 months. I'm going to figure this out. I've got a way. She was recently divorced, had two kids and no income. She was living in a trailer.
Oh,
And said, I talked to her and I would give her, some advice, go do this, build your credit, da, 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 find somebody who could support you. She called me. She said, my mother was able to get some cash and she had enough money to buy the franchise. And I went to the executive team and they said no. And I said, look, this woman called me every week for months. I
wow.
think we give her a chance. So fast forward 7 years, well, let's see, 3 years ago, I had left the company. I called her. We had dinner together. She had just left the Gucci store and bought her new husband a Gucci belt.
Wow.
So she built from one location to 6 locations and was able to buy a home. So when I think about those are businesses, she wouldn't have been able to do that without. And I remember when she first opened, she was the person. I said, what are you doing? When she opened her location, she's like, I'm sitting here waiting for customers. I said, go lock the door, get out. And she struggled with the local marketing and building relationships. It took her months to figure it out.
Wow.
And I was working with her all the time, and we spent a lot of painful calls helping her. How do you answer the phone? How do you close a sale? How do you do all the pieces of the business? And one day she called me. She said, I totally get it. And it took off so fast. And she bought a few existing businesses and opened a few new locations. So when you look at that, um, you know, can everyone do that? If they have the willingness to listen and to follow the step-by-step process because it's worked for many others, they can be successful. Executives are interesting because some of them are very entrepreneurial and following a system might be hard for them. And if they're willing to just take the step, typically what I do is I recommend that they talk to franchisees who have similar backgrounds so they can understand they came from a similar company. This was their experience. This is what it took them to get to build that business. That way they have a better insight. into what they
Mm.
need to do.
What's it what's it like to think back on that person when you first met them versus where they are today?
I actually think about her frequently, and I almost called her this weekend to tell her I was going to be on this podcast because she is the person that I think about who really struggled and she found a way to do it. And I think we all have that inside of us. We all have that grit, like I'm going to make this work and I cannot do this another day.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, in closing, for the person that needed to hear this conversation today, they want to get involved in franchising and have the right guide and person to connect with. Um, why why should they reach out to you and how? How can they?
So they should reach out if they have a thought in their mind that says, I'm interested in this because I'm I'm there to guide them. I'm not there to pressure them. My services are complimentary. I can work with people for 6 months and they never make a decision. Then all of a sudden they decide this isn't for me, or yes, I want to move forward. So this is a support person that's in your corner that helps guide you,
Hmm.
and I'm there to support them. My website is a great place to go. It's guidetofranchising.com. There's a fabulous entrepreneurial assessment there. They scroll down so they can see what their entrepreneurial score is. And, some people score 60% on that assessment. It doesn't mean they won't be successful as owners. What's interesting about business ownership, and I know you understand this, is you build an organization, you have a genius, right? Your genius is community outreach. You hate financials. You hire someone to supplement you there. If you've read the E-Myth, it
Yeah,
starts
Gerber.
out revisited, right? There's the woman who likes to bake pies. She opens a bakery because her friends tell her how successful she'll be, and she's miserable because she wants to bake pies. Now she's hiring employees and she has POS systems and she's got rent to pay. And she ends up closing her business because no one ever shared with her, hey, go bake pies, hire somebody who's really great at the organizational stuff. And that's the key to running
Hmm.
a business. So Guide to Franchising is the best place for them to find me, or on LinkedIn, Andrea Matola Dobkin.
Here's a quote I was going to originally use, and then I liked that other one when I was reading through and preparing. A good guide is like a lighthouse,
Mm,
illuminating the path even in the darkest of storms. Unknown,
mm.
who said it.
I love that.
If you're listening to this, connect with Andrea, go to the website, reach out. Don't let it go another 10 years of infomercials or
Mm.
and please share this with a friend that you know needs to hear this conversation. Leave us a review on the Culture Matters podcast, and we will see you next time. Thanks so much, Andrea.
Thank you, Jay.